Hello everyone, I'm Auntie Kara, but this video is not for kids. This video is another edition of book recommendations for grown-ups who love fairy tales. Today we're going to be reading from The Woman in the Wall, a very interesting book that I read first when I was a preteen, I think around the age of 11 or 12 or 13. It's one that my mom read ages ago and she recommended for me when I was kind of coming of age and doing that whole process that we all go through. And I read it then, and I hadn't read it since, so I recently read it so I could make sure I could find some good sections and actually remembered the whole story, because I did remember really loving it at that age, and I just wanted to make sure that I remembered everything correctly because it has been a very long time. So I read through it again, and I have to say it is a really interesting book. First of all, it's pretty short. It's less than 200 pages. I was able to read through it in a few days. If you really wanted to get ambitious, you could probably do it in a day if you had kind of just reading day for yourself. The other thing is that it is a very fast-paced story, so it's not one that you're going to kind of lag and get kind of lost in and not really want to finish it. It's really captivating, it's really interesting, and there is a certain level of surrealism. So it's not a book that has like in your face outright magic, but there is stuff in there that just like, it's very magical, but it's not, there's no reason for it to be magical. So the basic premise is that there's this family and they live in this old Victorian house, and the main character Anna is very, very shy. And when I say she's very, very shy, she is very, very shy. In the beginning of the book, when she's 7 years old, they describe her as being very physically small, so much so that like you put a doll in front of her and she kind of disappears from sight. So like that kind of surrealism where attributes are exaggerated to very, very interesting, surreal, magical proportions. And it also describes her as, being very much the wallflower, but again, to such an extreme that they talk about her as if she's almost invisible. And she is very shy. She doesn't like being around people. I'll read some excerpts in a little bit that kind of highlight that. But it's to the point that she probably has some form of agoraphobia. Like she never likes going outside. She doesn't like people. She kind of works behind the scenes of a lot of things. Like she's a seamstress. She makes her family all sorts of things. And she works well with objects. She talks about how she prefers objects to people. So she is really good at building and carpentry and sewing and all that sort of cool upkeep home care type stuff. And kind of what springs the story onwards is she gets really, really nervous around other people. So as kind of a coping mechanism, she begins to build things in this old Victorian house, like little secret rooms and passages, that when she's feeling particularly shy, she can actually move around the house without anybody seeing her. And nobody knows about these rooms and these passages. And it's kind of the culmination of many, many years of work, and it just gets more and more elaborate as the story progresses. And where she really retreats is when she's 7 years old. Her mom decides that she has to go to school. And they've kind of put it off for a couple of years on account of how shy she is, and how different she is from other people. And, finally her mom puts her foot down and says, we've put this off long enough. You need to go to school. And one of the teachers from the local elementary school comes to visit in her home, having heard that this child is a little bit different. And they have an interview, and it just goes disastrous. And I'll read through that for you guys today, a little bit of it. So I won't go into too much detail right now. But as a result of that meeting, she freaks. She can't deal. She can't even fathom going outside and being in school among her peers when this meeting with this teacher was so incredibly hard and traumatic in her own home. So she retreats fully into the walls and into these rooms and passageways and this secret behind the scenes life that she's built for herself as a way to avoid going to school. And she lives there for years. Like, by the end of the story, she's 14. So she's living behind the wall with her family, and oh, sorry for the siren there. That should be good. She's living behind the wall with her family in this house, and she's there for so long, and she does things like she'll leave them gifts of clothing that she's made and different trinkets, and kind of take charge of house repairs and things like that. But as she's getting bigger, she starts to run into problems. First of all, she goes through puberty behind these walls, with no one to explain to her what's happening. So the concept of having her first period and going through all of that body changing stuff, she has no one really to explain to her what's going on. And she's quite intelligent and quite well read, and she's even got a little passageway that backs onto the family library so she can read books as she likes. But still, like, she's just very confused, and even like her own emotional state, it really catches her by surprise. And I find it's a really interesting scenes in the book to think about what that would be like, going through that totally by yourself. And as I said, she's been there for years, and it's to the degree that her family almost forgets that she was real. Like, they remember her, but they've kind of convinced themselves that because the whole thing is so strange and it's been so long and it's so absurd, that maybe they just all imagined her. So they kind of talk about her the way you talk about, the Tooth Fairy or Santa Claus or something like that, where, there's this aura of mysticalness around it. So the story kind of finally comes to a head when someone pushes a note through a crack in the wall leading to her passageway. And the note was intended for her older sister, but she gets it and she starts responding. And she, has her first feelings of having a crush and falling in love, or at least, the love we all have when we're pre-teenage. And that kind of draws her out. And eventually she has to figure out how to escape this world that she's built for herself of comfort and safety in order to grow. And also, from a practical side of things, she's getting bigger, and she's not this little teeny tiny thing anymore that can just slip between a crack or a cushion in the couch. She's actually having a hard time moving through the passages that she built because she's getting bigger. And when people start actually seeing her later, they finally say, like, oh my gosh, like, I can see you now. Like, you're not invisible anymore. So it's a very interesting mind experiment to read this book. I really highly recommend it. It's great for adults. I think it's officially a young adult novel, or like a teen novel. But, I would say this book would be good from anyone from the age of 12 to whenever, just because it is such an interesting read. And Anna is she's very relatable if you're someone who has been shy, or you are shy, or you had a period in your life where you were really shy, and that whole kind of wanting the world to see and appreciate the wonderful creature that you are, but also being really afraid of being seen. And I think that is an interesting paradox that a lot of us can relate to. So I'll read to you some sections I've marked down. The first one I'm going to read for you is the introduction to the book. It's the first page. So it starts chapter 1. Hello, my name is Anna. I am 14 years old and a very shy person. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. You probably have tons of better things to do than sit around listening to me. What else do you want to know? I'm Anna, and I'm shy, and I'm 14, and that's really all there is to tell. Thank you. Goodbye. The end. Oh, you're still here? Oh dear. Now I suppose I'll have to. All right. I'm sorry. It really wasn't true what I said. There is more to tell. If you're absolutely positive it won't bore you, I'll tell you the story of my life. So far, anyways. I have always been shy. The urge to hide came over me at a very early age. My mother says I was a good baby. I never fussed at all. Both my sisters came out of the womb with their mouths wide open, screaming their heads off, their hands outstretched to grasp at whatever life offered. I, on the other hand, never even whimpered as I entered the world. I just lay there quietly in my incubator and tried to fit in. I had no longings for power or domination. I didn't want to intrude in any way. I simply wanted to blend into the scenery with as little fuss as possible. In this, I succeeded. "Where's the baby gone?" my mother would say, poking around in the crib blankets. "She's got to be right here. I put her here myself 2 seconds ago. Anna's a naughty girl hiding from Mummy." "Anna!" my mother's cry would echo from cellar to cupola. "Where are you, Anna?" That was what she always wanted to know. Even today, all I have to do is close my eyes and say aloud, "Anna, where are you, Anna?" And those long ago days come to mind perfectly clear in every detail. A tendency to disappear, you see, is and always has been my leading characteristic. I don't really disappear, not exactly. I'm just not very noticeable. I'm small and thin with a face like a glass of water, and I like to hide. I believe that I inherited this trait from my father. I never really knew him. After a series of temporary vanishings, each longer than the last, Father faded out of our lives altogether, and we never saw him again. I was only 3 years old at the time. I can't tell you much about my father, except that he bought a very large and dilapidated house for his bride, amassed an impressive collection of tools and materials with which to repair it, and then disappeared. I don't think that it was the size of the job that frightened him off. No, I'm afraid that as the years went by, he felt that the house, big as it was getting too full of daughters. He grew more nervous and jumpy, my mother says, after the birth of each child, and his absences became longer and more frequent. So that gives you a little taste of her invisibility powers. All right, so this one is after the concept of the school teacher or headmistress visiting comes into play. I speeded up the schedule for construction of my secret room. Ours is an old house, a Queen Anne Victorian built in the 1880s with the expectation of housing a large family and a staff of servants. It is known locally as the Bloodgood Mansion and has 22 rooms, not counting halls, bathrooms, enclosed porches, attics, walk-in closets, and cavernous linen cupboards. I created the secret room out of plasterboard, 2x4 planks of lumber, and an empty space. Our house had thousands of square feet of unused, unnoticed, unneeded empty space. The space I took for my secret room, really it was a room and a passageway, was of no importance to anyone but me. So you really couldn't call it stealing, could you? This was the most ambitious project I had ever attempted, but I had no doubt that I could carry it out. I am not a modest person. In fact, in some ways, I'm afraid I'm horribly conceited. This may sound odd to you coming from the mouth of such a shy person. Well, it is odd. I don't claim to understand it. The very thought of a stranger's eyes upon me makes me faint with fear. My heart pounds in my ears, my hands shake, and I see spots in front of my eyes. Yet whenever someone looks right past me without seeing me, I feel myself infinitely superior to him. I laugh in my secret heart at his stupidity and hug my own quick-wittedness to myself. Now, I know as well as you do that this is wrong. A really nice person would not think or feel this way, so I do my best to subdue my vanity. For instance, whenever I do something that might be considered clever, I try to take no notice whatsoever. Or if I must think about it, I look for flaws. Not top-quality work, I say to myself. And whenever I do something wrong, I point it out to myself very firmly. Anna, I say, you are a perfect fool. I am not really sure that this is working. How difficult it is being human. Inanimate objects never have all these complicated emotions. Just think how simple and pleasant it would be to go through life as an object. An attractive little blue sugar bowl with a painted bird on the lid, for instance, sitting in a patch of sunlight on the breakfast table. How peaceful, how tranquil that must be. And if a careless elbow knocked you over and smashed you to bits, you wouldn't care. Why should you? Being brainless has its advantages. I love things. They are so patient and good. They'll do anything you ask, anything at all, if only you understand their nature and treat them well. Things never make me nervous the way people do. Even I make myself nervous. She is such an interesting character. All right, I have one more. So this is when the teacher, Mrs. Waltzhammer, has arrived. "Hello, Anna," she bawled. She reached out one vast white hand toward me. I stared in horrible fascination at the hand as it approached. "What are you doing?" Andrea demanded in a strangled croak. "Just saying hello to Anna," Mrs. Waltzhammer said in a jolly voice. The hand gripped me insecurely around the waist, crushing me up against the doll. I was lifted up, and my mind fell into darkness, and I knew no more. "That's not my sister. That's a doll," Christy was saying patiently when I came back to my senses again. She sounded as though she'd said it before. I knew a moment of pure panic. I could hear Christy's voice, but I had no idea where I was. I seemed to be lying in a very small padded cell of some kind. I could see the ceiling of the front parlor above me, but all around were flabby, leathery walls. Underneath me were a lot of loose, sharp objects that dug into my back. "Well, here I am at last." It was my mother's voice. "This house is so big," she said gaily. "I guess I just got lost coming back from the kitchen." "Oh, coffee, goody." Mrs. Waltzhammer's voice was mercifully deadened by the walls of the padded cell, but she was standing dangerously near. I heard sounds of slurping as Mrs. Waltzhammer imbibed her favorite beverage. "Good and strong," she exulted. "And how have you all been getting along while I was doing the tea tray?" Mother asked. Silence from Andrea and Christy. "Excellently," Mrs. Waltzhammer said. "I think we have made great progress, and now I'm afraid I must eat and run. I have another appointment. Delicious cookies, my dear." "Thank you, but Anna made them." Mrs. Waltzhammer laugh rang out. "Oh, Anna made them, did she? Clever, good Anna." She laughed again. "Why don't you walk me to the door, Mrs. Newland?" "Mom," I heard Andrea's urgent whisper, "she thinks Anna is Christy's doll, and we can't find Anna." "What, dear?" Mother murmured, and then a huge flap fell down over the top of my cell, and the ceiling disappeared. The world lurched beneath me. A hail of large, angular objects fell about me. I reached out for something to hold on to, but there was nothing. "Help!" I cried. "Help!" I thrashed about for a while, unable to get onto my knees. Outside, there was a hearty booming that sounded like Mrs. Waltzhammer and a worried tweeting that sounded like my mother. Thankfully, the movement stopped for a moment, and I struggled into a better position. Then abruptly, off we went again. This time, however, I had gotten my head out under the roof flap, and my knees were braced against some hard surface. A mass of green shrubbery bobbed into my field of vision. I saw a concrete path below me and a green lawn. We were approaching the car parked by the side of the road. I looked up as best I could from under the flap. Far above floated Miss Waltzhammer's huge face. I was in Miss Waltzhammer's purse. In a moment she would get into her car and we would drive away. In one convulsive moment I leaped clear of the enveloping purse and landed hard on the pavement. There was no time to be lost. I scrambled painfully into the shrubbery. Mrs. Waltzhammer made a sound like ugh, ugh. It sounded like she swallowed her tongue. She looked furtively around and then hurried into her car and drove away. I was out of the house. For the first time in years and years, I was out of the house. I stood alone under the naked sky with nothing but air and space between me and the huge, barbarously bright sun. I looked up into the sky and grew dizzy. At any moment, I felt I might fall off the earth. I might be pulled into the greedy heat of the sun, or I might go flying off into dark, eternal nothingness. Quickly I moved away, looked at the houses and trees and cars, trying to root myself to the ground, but everything was so far away. I had spent many hours lately inside the wall, and I had grown used to its proportions. Inside the wall, all distances are small, all horizons are close at hand. It is easy to forget how large the world is, and how empty. I bolted into the house, down the cellar steps, up through the trap door, and flung myself sobbing into my secret room. I wouldn't be leaving again in a hurry. So I hope you enjoyed that reading, that little glimpse into the life of Anna. She's very, very interesting. And please, please, please check out this book. It is definitely worth the time. It's a short read, it's an easy read, and it's so much fun. I hope you guys enjoyed my review and my reading. I also have to apologize because I'm a little week late on this. Life got busy and I was fighting a cold, so I wanted to make sure that my voice was somewhat healed before diving into that reading so I could do it justice. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you guys in a couple weeks for another book review. Ta-ta for now.